New York just shook hands on a gargantuan, like, $268 billion budget, but the real drama is actually the multi-billion-dollar hole they are desperately trying to hide.
Yeah, I mean, it is a staggering number. When you look at $268 billion, you are looking at a budget that is literally larger than the entire economic output of New Zealand.
Right.
Yet, despite spending all that money, the gap between what the city has in the bank and what it actually needs to function is just growing wider by the minute.
Welcome to our deep dive. So we are spending today looking through this massive stack of fascinating financial documents. We've got independent budget analyses, some data-heavy reports from the city's comptroller, and reporting from CBS and Street's blog.
Yeah, a lot of material to cover.
Definitely.
Yep.
And our mission here is to figure out how state and city leaders plan to plug this colossal financial hole without chasing away the very people who, fund the city. We are looking at what these new rules mean for everyone.
Which is a very tricky balance to strike.
Exactly. So we will cover the penthouses sitting high above Manhattan, and we will even get down to the street level to look at the digital speed limiters the state wants to force into certain cars. Now, before we jump in, a quick disclaimer for you listening.
Right, the impartiality bit.
Yes. These sources contain some highly politically charged debates between left-leaning and more conservative fiscal approaches. We are not taking a side here. We're just impartially unpacking the financial math and the policies that are actually on the table.
Because the math itself is complicated enough without the politics, the documents highlight a fierce debate. You have advocates arguing for higher taxes on the wealthy, and you have others pushing to hold the line on taxes to prevent people from moving away.
Right, and we're going to look closely at the math behind both of those arguments. So let's jump right into the numbers. Before we talk about how leaders plan to spend $268 billion, we really have to look at the deficit that is threatening the future of New York City.
Yeah, the deficit is the elephant in the room.
It really is. The Independent Budget Office, the IBO, released this financial projection that is basically a flashing red warning light. They estimate the city faces a long-term budget gap that could hit $11.5 billion by the year 2030.
$11.5 billion. I mean, that shortfall is where this whole story really begins.
Yeah.
And the new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, is taking a totally different approach to this gap than previous administrations did. Past mayors often relied on this accounting trick called chronic under-budgeting.
Which, I mean, that just sounds like a polite accounting term for hiding the ball.
It essentially is. Previous administrations would systematically understate the expected expenses for these huge city programs.
Even when they knew the real numbers.
Right, exactly. Even when their own internal data clearly showed the costs were going to be high, they would just put a lower number on the official budget so things looked balanced on paper. But Mayor Mamdani is doing away with that. He is shifting the city to what he calls an honest ledger. He's finally putting the real, unvarnished costs right on the table for everyone to see.
It reminds me of someone who throws their credit card bills into a drawer unopened. Like, they know they owe the money, but if they do not look at the statement, they can pretend the debt is not there.
That is a perfect analogy.
And now, the new mayor is opening all those envelopes, spreading the bills out on the kitchen table, and forcing the city to look at them. And the numbers inside those envelopes are frankly shocking. Just look at the City FHEPS program.
Yeah, City FHEPS. So for those who don't know, it's a rental voucher program. It is designed to help eligible New Yorkers find housing or avoid eviction by paying a portion of their monthly rent directly to landlords.
Which is a really vital safety net.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But the costs for this program are skyrocketing by about 4% a month.
Wait, 4% a month? Not a year.
A month, yeah. The administration estimates that by 2030, this one single program will cost $3.5 billion annually.
That is wild. Why is it growing so fast?
Well, it's a combination of factors. The eviction moratoriums from the pandemic era ended, so obviously more people need help. And at the exact same time, median rents in the city are at record highs.
Right. And the inventory of available affordable apartments is historically low.
Exactly. So when rents go up, the value of the voucher has to go up, and the city ultimately foots the bill.
And it is not just housing costs soaring. The state government actually forces the city to pay for these incredibly expensive mandates, but then, provides zero funding to help cover them.
Yeah, unfunded state mandates are just a structural nightmare for city planners. Let's look at the MTA's paratransit program, Access a Ride.
Okay.
The state permanently changed the formula for how much the city has to contribute. They shifted the city's required share from 50% of the cost all the way up to 80%.
Just unilaterally.
Pretty much. And that one administrative change forces the city to pay an extra $165 million a year.
Okay, and the sources also highlight something called special education due process cases. That line item jumped from $938 million to $1.6 billion in just 1 year. Can you explain why that jump happened?
Yeah, that is a really fascinating legal mechanism. So, under federal and state law, if a public school system cannot provide adequate services for a student with disabilities, the parents can actually sue the city.
Right.
And if the parents win, the city is legally required to pay the tuition for that student to attend a private school that can meet their needs.
Wow.
Because the city has struggled to meet these special education requirements internally, the number of successful lawsuits and the resulting tuition payouts have absolutely exploded.
So the city is paying private school tuition for thousands of kids.
Yeah.
And then you add the new education mandate on top of that.
Right. A 2022 state law forces the city to meet strict new public school class size limits by 2028. To physically comply with this law, the city must hire 6,900 new teachers.
6,900.
Yeah, and adding those salaries and benefits will cost $700 million annually. But again, the state mandated the rule without sending the city the money to pay for it.
So the state is forcing these expensive rules on the city, and the city is finally admitting the true cost of things like rental vouchers. How does the city avoid a total fiscal collapse?
Well, this is where it gets tough. New York City faces a rigid legal constraint that the federal government does not have. The city is legally required to balance its budget.
They can't just run a deficit.
Exactly. They cannot print money and they cannot run a deficit. So to solve an $11.5 billion math problem, they really only have three choices: raise revenues through taxes, cut services, or drain their emergency reserves.
Which brings us to the ideological clash. Because with the bills finally open on the table, the mayor and the governor basically went to war over how to pay them.
They did. Mayor Mamdani took a very aggressive approach. He proposed a tax-the-rich strategy to close the city's near-term $5.4 billion gap.
Okay, and what does that look like?
His main target was wealthy individuals earning over $1 million a year. He wanted to raise their top personal income tax rate from 3.876% to 5.876%.
So a flat 2% jump for top earners. The reports note that this hike alone would generate $3 billion a year.
Right. And he also pushed to reduce something called the pass-through entity tax credit, or PTET.
Wait, time out. Before we go further, what actually is a pass-through entity tax credit? I feel like we need to unpack that.
It is a bit in the weeds, but it is important. You remember a few years ago when the federal government capped the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction, at $10,000.
Right, yeah. That hit high-tax states really hard because residents could no longer deduct their state taxes from their federal tax bills.
Exactly. So New York created a clever workaround for business owners. If you own an LLC or a partnership, which is a pass-through entity, you can choose to pay state taxes at the business level rather than the individual level.
Oh, because businesses do not have that $10,000 SALT cap.
You got it. So the business pays the tax, deducts it fully on their federal return, and then the state gives the business owner a credit on their personal state taxes, so they are not getting taxed twice.
Okay, so it is a legal workaround to save business owners money on their federal taxes.
Yes. But the mayor wanted to reduce the size of that credit the city gives back. By scaling back the PTT credit, the city would just keep more of that tax revenue.
But, I mean, the mayor cannot just wave a wand and raise income taxes, right? Doesn't the state control the city's tax rates?
That is the catch. The mayor needs the state legislature and the governor to actually authorize those tax hikes. And Governor Kathy Hochul delivered a firm no.
She totally rejected it.
Completely. She rejected the broad income tax hikes. She made a point of noting that the state managed to balance its own $268 billion budget without raising statewide taxes.
And what's her reasoning?
Her stance rests on a fear of capital flight. She believes that if you target high earners with more income taxes, they will simply pack up and move out of the state, which would obviously erode the tax base even further.
And it wasn't just the governor. The New York City Council also pushed back against the mayor. City Council Speaker Julie Menin proposed an alternative path.
Right. The council argued they could close the gap using targeted efficiency savings, revenue reestimates, and a much smaller scale back of that PTT credit.
Yeah, they believe they can squeeze $1 billion over 2 years just from the PT change, completely avoiding those broad income tax hikes.
Exactly.
But hang on, I have to question the realism on both sides of this argument. First, you look at the council's plan. Can you realistically cut billions of dollars through efficiencies without eventually firing teachers, cutting police patrols, or reducing trash collection?
It's incredibly difficult.
Right. But then again, if you go with the mayor's plan and hike taxes on billionaires, won't they just buy a house in Florida and change their official residency?
And you are hitting on the absolute core tension of local government finance right there. It is a constant battle between structural math and human behavior.
Yeah.
The mayor looks at the numbers and argues that without tax hikes, you get severe austerity and painful service cuts. But the governor looks at human behavior and argues that high taxes destroy the tax base.
Because the wealthiest 1% of New Yorkers pay a huge percentage of the total income tax.
Exactly. If just a few thousand of them leave, the revenue plummets.
So since the broad income tax idea hit a brick wall, the two sides eventually shook hands on a highly targeted compromise, which is the pied-à-terre tax.
Right. So pied-à-terre literally translates to foot on the ground. In real estate, it basically means a secondary residence.
Like a luxury apartment or condo kept by someone who lives primarily somewhere else.
Exactly. The new law places an annual surcharge on these luxury second homes in New York City that are valued over $5 million.
And Governor Hochul projects this specific tax will hit about 13,000 homes and bring in $500 million annually.
But the New York City Comptroller released a reality check on those numbers, and, well, it paints a very different picture.
Yeah, the Comptroller's report is fascinating. They predict the tax will actually fall quite short of the governor's $500 million goal.
Significantly short.
Yeah, they estimate it will bring in between $340 million and $380 million, and it will only affect about 11,200 properties.
Which is a huge discrepancy.
$120 million difference is not a rounding error. So the Comptroller points out some major legal loopholes. First, the law exempts properties that are rented out to primary residents.
Right.
So if a wealthy owner simply decides to rent out their $8 million second home on a standard lease, they dodge the tax completely.
And the second reason involves a really strange feature of New York property law. It is known as Section 581 of the Real Property Tax Law. By statute, the city must assess co-ops and condos as if they were income-producing rental buildings. They are legally barred from assessing them based on comparable market sales.
Wait, I need you to explain that.
Yeah.
If I buy a $10 million penthouse, the city does not assess its value by looking at the $10 million check I just wrote?
Correct.
That's crazy.
The law requires the city assessor to look at your luxury penthouse, find a rental building that is somewhat similar, guess how much income your penthouse would generate if it were rented out like a normal apartment, and then base the value on that imaginary rental income.
That sounds like trying to figure out the value of a rare Ferrari by looking at the daily rental rates of a Honda Civic? I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. The law was originally designed decades ago to protect long-term middle-class condo owners from getting hit with sudden, massive property tax spikes just because the real estate market got hot.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the side effect is that it artificially depresses the assessed value of ultra-luxury properties on paper. So a condo that easily sells for $10 million on the open market might be legally assessed by the city at, say, $4 million.
Which puts it safely below the $5 million threshold for the pied-à-terre tax.
Exactly.
It's literally like squeezing a water balloon.
Yeah.
You squeeze the luxury real estate market really hard, trying to get $500 million out of it, and the wealth simply bulges out somewhere else through these legal loopholes.
And the comptroller explicitly warns about this in the report. They bring up the concept of behavioral changes. The report points to a historical example from Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, right, the empty homes tax.
Yeah. Vancouver implemented an empty homes tax to deal with a housing crisis. And what happened? When you tax wealth heavily, owners adapt. In Vancouver, people started renting their units out for just enough months to avoid the tax. Or they restructured their ownership under different names. Because human beings adapt to rules, the comptroller expects at least a 10% drop in expected revenues right off the bat in New York.
You design a tax to hit a specific target, but the target learns how to move.
Precisely.
And that concept leads perfectly into how this budget hits the street level. Because the budget does not just target foreign billionaires buying penthouses, It reaches right down to how regular New Yorkers drive their cars and buy their insurance.
Oh, absolutely. Let's bring this down to the pavement. The budget includes sweeping auto insurance reforms. And the financial stakes here are just huge.
Right.
According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the societal cost of car crashes in the United States hits $135 billion a year.
And Governor Hochul campaigned heavily to fight auto insurance fraud. She argued that fraud and runaway litigation costs are jacking up premiums for regular safe drivers.
Yeah, so to combat this, the new budget adopts some strict rules, including changes to no-fault insurance.
Okay, remind me how no-fault insurance works.
Sure. No-fault insurance is a system where if you get into a fender bender, your own insurance company pays your medical bills up to a certain limit, regardless of who actually caused the crash.
Got it.
The idea is to keep minor accidents out of the court system. However, historically, you could step outside the no-fault system and sue the other driver for pain and suffering if you met the threshold of a, quote, serious injury.
And the definition of a serious injury is what they just changed, right?
Yes.
In the past, the law included a 90-day rule. If an injury kept you from performing your normal daily activities for 90 days, it automatically qualified as a serious injury, and you could sue.
Right, but the new budget eliminates that 90-day category entirely.
Wow.
They are also limiting payouts for drivers who were found to be more than 50% at fault for an accident.
But lawmakers knew they had to balance these strict limits with consumer protections, so they banned insurance companies from using your zip code or your credit score to determine your insurance rates.
Which is a huge shift. Historically, if you lived in a lower-income zip code, you paid higher rates even if you had a completely spotless driving record.
Exactly. And the new law also mandates that insurers cannot automatically hike rates by 5% anymore. They must prove they actually need the money and get prior approval from the state before raising your premium.
But I mean, I have to push back on the injury threshold change a bit here. Trial lawyers are furious about this.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They argue that narrowing the definition of a serious injury strips victims of brain injuries and soft tissue injuries of their legal rights. They claim it basically leaves crash victims out to dry.
I see.
If you cap damages and stop people from suing, aren't you just protecting the insurance company's profit margins? The lawyers point out that Hochul's plan might only save drivers about $25 a month. So the question is that worth giving up your right to sue if you are hurt?
That really is the central debate. The state argues that lowering litigation costs will force premiums down for everyone, while the critics argue that you are just taking compensation away from injured people and handing it to insurance executives.
Yeah. The state hopes that requiring prior approval for rate hikes will force insurers to pass the savings back to consumers, but, the market will ultimately decide if that works.
Speaking of the streets, we have to talk about the Stop Superspeeders Act, because this is one of the most fascinating pieces of legislation in the whole stack.
It really is. It is aimed directly at chronically reckless drivers.
And the statistics on this are just wild. The local news source Streets blog pulled records and found one specific driver who racked up 547 speed camera and red light violations since the year 2022.
Yeah, 547 violations.
How does someone get caught speeding over 500 times in a couple of years and still possess a vehicle? I mean, that is more than one ticket every other day.
Well, it highlights a major flaw in how camera enforcement actually works.
Okay, how so?
If a police officer pulls you over, you get points on your license, and eventually you lose your license.
Right.
But speed cameras just issue a fine to the registered owner of the car. There are no points. So if you are wealthy enough to just pay the fines or reckless enough to just ignore them, you can keep driving no matter how many times the camera catches you.
Which is exactly why they created the Stop Superspeeders Act. Under the new rule, drivers who get 16 or more speed camera violations within a 12-month period face a physical consequence.
They have to install an intelligent speed assistance device in their car.
What is that?
It is essentially a digital governor. It is a device that physically prevents the vehicle's engine from exceeding the local speed limit.
Whoa.
Yeah. So if you are on a street where the limit is 25 miles per hour, the car simply will not go faster than 25.
It is a really radical approach to traffic enforcement, and I think it brings us right back to the central theme of today's deep dive. We have covered an enormous amount of ground here. This $268 billion budget is just a massive high-wire balancing act.
It really is. We see a city striving for honest accounting by finally admitting the true costs of rental vouchers and education mandates.
Yeah, and we see an ideological battle over whether you should tax billionaires or shrink the government.
And maybe most importantly, we see the profound impact of behavioral economics. Whether the government is dealing with an $11.5 billion budget gap trying to assess the value of a luxury condo, or trying to slow down a reckless driver, every single rule attempts to shape how human beings behave.
Which leaves you with a thought to mull over. Think about the controller's stark warning regarding those behavioral changes.
Right, the Vancouver example.
Exactly. If people always adapt to the rules, if a billionaire can dodge a penthouse tax by signing a lease, and if the driver can rack up 500 camera tickets without losing their license, can a city truly rely on punitive measures to fix its long-term problems? Keep a close eye on how these property owners and drivers adapt over the next year because, as we saw with the water balloon, when you squeeze a problem in one place, it almost always finds a way to bulge out somewhere else.